Hello and welcome, beautiful people. This is Marco Narrates, where I narrate lines from various movies, books, TV shows, video games, etc. that I like. Today I'm getting into J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, as Bilbo Baggins prepares to host an unexpected party of dwarves, and just forgetting prior engagements made with Gandalf the day before. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle and put out another cup and saucer and an extra cake or two and ran to the door.
"I am so sorry to keep you waiting,"
he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf, with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside just as if he had been expected. He hung his cloak on the nearest peg and, "Dwalin, at your service," he said with a low bow.
"Bilbo Baggins at yours,"
said the hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added,
"I am just about to take tea. Pray, come and have some with me."
a little stiff perhaps, but he meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung his things up in your hall without a word of explanation? They had not been at table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake. There came another, even louder ring at the bell.
"Excuse me,"
said the hobbit, and off he went to the door.
"So you have got here at last."
That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he had been invited.
"I see they have begun to arrive already,"
he said when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it, and,
"Balin at your service,"
he said with his hand on his breast.
"Thank you,"
said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but "they have begun to arrive" had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host he knew his duty and stuck to it however painful, he might have to go without.
"Come along in and have some tea,"
he managed to say after taking a deep breath.
"A little beer would suit me better, if it is all the same to you, my good sir,"
said Balin with the white beard.
"but I don't mind some cake. Seed cake if you have any." "Lots,"
Bilbo found himself answering to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off too, to the cellar to fill a pint beer mug, and then to a pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes which he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, when loud came a ring at the bell again, and then another ring.
"Gandalf for certain this time,"
he thought as he puffed along the passage, but it was not. It was 2 more dwarves, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was hardly surprised at all.
"What can I do for you, my dwarves?"
he said. "Kili, at your service," said the one.
"And Fili,"
added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed.
"At yours and your families,"
replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time.
"Balin and Dwalin here already, I see. Let us join the throng,"
said Kili.
"Throng?"
thought Mr. Baggins.
"I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my things, and have a drink."
He had only just had a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarfs sat round the table and talked about mines and gold, and troubles with the goblins, and the depredations of dragons, and lots of other things which he did not understand, and did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous, when his bell rang again, as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off.
"Someone at the door,"
he said, blinking.
"Some 4, I should say, by the sound,"
said Fili.
"Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance."
The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands, and wondered what had happened, and what was going to happen, and whether they would all stay to supper. Then the bell rang again, louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all. It was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying "at your service" one after another. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin and Gloin were their names, and very soon 2 purple hoods, a gray hood, a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale and some for porter, and one for coffee and all of them for cakes, so the Hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set in the hearth. The seed cakes were gone, and the dwarves were starting on a round of buttered scones when there came a loud knock, not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the Hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry, and altogether bewildered and bewuthered. This is the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarves. 4 more. And there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark he had put there the morning before.
Carefully, carefully,
he said.
It is not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Bifur, Bofur, Bombur, and especially Thorin.
At your service,
said Bifur, Bofur, and Bombur, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf. In fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Bifur, Bofur, and Bombur on top of him. For one thing, Bombur was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty, and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray, don't mention it," and stopped frowning.
Now we are all here,
said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs.
Quite a merry gathering.
I hope there's something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me.
And for me, said Thorin.
And raspberry jam and apple tart,
said Bifur.
And mince pies and cheese,
said Bofur. And pork pie and salad, said Bombur.
And more cakes.
And ale.
And coffee, if you don't mind, called the other dwarfs through the door.
Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow,
Gandalf called after him as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries.
And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles.
Seems to know as much about the inside of my larder as I do myself,
thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face, and annoyed.
"Confusticate and bebother these dwarves,"
he said aloud.
"Why don't they come and lend a hand?"
Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Fili and Kili behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlor, and set out everything afresh. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed. It was fun working on a second Hobbit video, so there will definitely be more of those coming in the future. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, please consider hitting the like and subscribe button, and let me know down in the comments if there's a specific part of The Hobbit you would like to hear narrated. But until then, farewell.